The Arizona desert knows how to keep secrets. It has done so for centuries, swallowing footprints, erasing tire tracks, and returning nothing but silence to those who come looking. But in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, the Sonoran Desert swallowed something the modern world was entirely unprepared to lose: an 84-year-old grandmother, a woman of faith, a mother of three, a woman whose daughter wakes up millions of Americans every single morning from a studio in New York City. When Nancy Guthrie vanished from her home in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, she didn't just disappear from a house. She disappeared from a world that believed it had finally become too watched, too wired, and too connected for something like this to happen. She proved that world wrong. What unfolded over the weeks that followed was not simply a missing persons case. It became an investigation into the terrifying gap between the security we believe we have and the security we actually possess. It became a window into the cold architecture of premeditated crime. How someone can study a life from the outside, map its rhythms, identify its weaknesses, and move through it like a ghost. The FBI called it one of the most technically sophisticated abductions in recent Arizona history. And what they eventually uncovered, piece by painstaking piece, shook investigators, the public, and the nation's sense of safety to its very core. Nancy Guthrie was last seen on the evening of January 31st, 2026. Wikipedia by the following morning. The seat she normally occupied at St. Philip's in the Hills Parish was empty. She was reported missing on Sunday, February 1st, after failing to show up for a virtual church service. U.S. News and World Report to those who knew her. That absence was the loudest alarm bell imaginable. Nancy Guthrie was not the kind of woman who missed church. She had lived in the Tucson area for more than 5 decades, having moved there with her family in the early 1970s. She was married to Charles Guthrie until his death at age 49 during a mining exploration trip in Mexico in 1988. Wikipedia in the decades since, she had built a life defined by resilience, routine, and a quiet, unshakable faith. Her 3 children, Savannah, Annie, and Cameron Wikipedia, had grown up watching their mother hold the family together through grief and change. She was, by every account, not merely a woman of advanced age living alone in the desert. She was the bedrock. What investigators found when they arrived at the Catalina foothills home defied the expected language of a crime scene. There was no shattered window, no sign of a violent struggle, no furniture overturned in a desperate fight. What there was, however, was deeply unsettling in a different way. Her phone and purse were found inside the home. Her back doors were found propped open. U.S. News and World Report it was as though the house itself had been rearranged by someone who knew exactly where everything was, and exactly how to leave without a trace. Except for one thing. Officials revealed that DNA testing confirmed that blood found on the home's front porch was Nancy Guthrie's. U.S. News and World Report she had been injured, and she had been taken. A multi-agency investigation led by the Pima County Sheriff's Department, with assistance from the FBI, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and search and rescue teams, included extensive forensic analysis, neighborhood canvassing, and review of surveillance footage. Wikipedia from the very first hours, investigators understood they were not dealing with a crime of impulse. Every element pointed to careful, calculated planning. The doorbell camera outside Nancy's home became one of the most critical and most frustrating pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. The FBI and Sheriff's Department obtained video of an apparent suspect described as a man of average build, approximately 5 feet 9 or 5 feet 10 inches tall, wearing a face mask, gloves, and a black Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. CBS News the footage was brief, partially obscured, and deeply chilling. Authorities expressed disappointment that a disconnected doorbell camera and an inactive subscription had hindered access to potentially crucial footage. National Today, the very technology meant to protect the home had been rendered useless, not by brute force, but by a subscription lapse and a suspect who apparently knew where to look and what to avoid. One theory emerged that the suspect approached the door a first time, noticed the camera, and was scared off, only to return later when he tampered with the device and placed branches in front of the lens. ABC News, if that theory is correct, it speaks to a level of reconnaissance that is genuinely terrifying. This was not a random act. Someone had studied this house. Someone had walked past it, watched it, and returned when the conditions were exactly right. The predator had not forced their way through the door. They had mapped their way to it. As the investigation expanded outward from the Catalina foothills, federal agents pursued every thread with urgency. Authorities canvassed residences, businesses, and government agencies for surveillance footage, reviewing thousands of hours of video in a painstaking process that often involved slowing footage down frame by frame. CNN, every Walmart in the Southwest that had sold the same model of Ozark Trail backpack was cross-referenced. Every route leading out of the neighborhood was mapped and remapped. Then came a discovery that briefly electrified the investigation. A glove found near Nancy Guthrie's home appeared to match those worn by the suspect captured in the doorbell camera footage. The glove contained DNA. CNN, the FBI's forensic labs, ran the profile through CODIS, the National Criminal Database. The gloves did not return any matches in the national database and didn't match DNA found at Guthrie's home. CNN, the investigation had hit a wall, but it did not stop. Black gloves previously publicized in the case, found in February about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, were later traced by DNA to a local restaurant worker who is not part of this investigation. CNN, it was a devastating setback, a lead that had carried enormous weight for weeks before evaporating entirely. For the FBI agents working the case, and for a family watching from the painful distance of national media, it was another reminder of just how cleverly this crime had been constructed. Every piece of physical evidence that seemed to point somewhere ended up pointing nowhere. Investigators were pursuing the theory that the suspect had been detained during a traffic stop south of Tucson. Pima County Sheriff's investigators, with the assistance of the FBI, searched a Rio Rico residence connected to the person of interest. CBS News, a man released from questioning, told reporters he made deliveries in the Tucson area. U.S. News and World Report he was not charged. The desert, once again, kept its secret. While the physical search continued across the Sonoran terrain, a parallel war was being fought in the digital space. Multiple ransom notes of undetermined origin demanded payment in cryptocurrency. 2 deadlines had passed by February 9th. Wikipedia, the notes arrived not through back channels or private negotiations. They arrived in newsrooms. On February 2nd, KOLD-TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson, reported that it had received a letter demanding payment for Guthrie's release. Wikipedia, the kidnappers had bypassed every conventional channel and gone straight to the public square, forcing a grieving family to navigate their most private nightmare in front of the entire world. The demand, reportedly $6 million in Bitcoin, carried with it a cold specificity. The ransom demand was $6 million with a deadline of 5 p.m. on February 9th. ABC News, the digital trail, was engineered to be cold. Every cryptocurrency address was designed to be untraceable. Every email was routed through layers of encryption. The FBI Cyber Division was dealing with a suspect who had not just planned the physical abduction carefully. They had planned the digital aftermath with equal precision. Then came the noise. On February 5th, a California man was arrested on federal charges alleging that he had posed as an abductor and demanded ransom from the Guthrie family. Authorities stated the scheme was unrelated to the other ransom demands that had received wide publicity. Wikipedia, it was a grotesque exploitation of a family's worst moment. A grifter, watching the story unfold on television and deciding to insert himself into it for profit. He was not the last. The FBI was forced to sift through an avalanche of fraudulent contacts, hoax ransom notes, and online conspiracy theories, each one consuming investigative resources and adding another layer of confusion to an already labyrinthine case. On April 6, 2026, new potential ransom notes claiming to know where Nancy's body is located, as well as demanding half a Bitcoin for details, were discovered, but the legitimacy of those notes is yet to be determined. Wikipedia, the timeline of communication from whoever actually holds the truth about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts, has been deliberately obscured behind a wall of imposters and noise. It is, in many ways, part of the architecture of the crime itself. On February 7th, Savannah Guthrie posted a social media video aimed at her mother's potential abductors, saying, "We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us." ABC News. It was a moment of extraordinary public vulnerability. A woman who has spent her career asking the hard questions of others now reduced to pleading into a camera for the return of her own mother. The words were measured, but the weight behind them was immeasurable. In an earlier message, Savannah had spoken directly to the camera about her mother's health. She lives in constant pain. She is without any medicine. She needs it to survive. She needs it not to suffer. CBS News. Nancy had a pacemaker and required daily heart medication. Wikipedia. For the investigators, this was not just a matter of solving a kidnapping. They were racing against a biological reality. Every day that passed without Nancy receiving her medication was a day the window of recovery narrowed. On February 24th, Savannah Guthrie announced a new $1 million reward, bringing the combined reward from the family and law enforcement to $1.2 million. Sources familiar with the family's decision said they had been prepared to fund the reward from the start, but waited because they were initially advised against it. ABC News. It was a desperate escalation, a family trying to shake loose any piece of information that someone, somewhere, might be holding out of fear, indecision, or ignorance. In an interview, Savannah recalled calling her brother Cameron and said he raised the prospect that their mother had been kidnapped for ransom. She recounted asking whether her public profile could have played a role, and that her brother replied that it might. HNGN. The thought that her own career, her success, her visibility, her mourning presence in millions of American homes could have made a mother a target is a weight that no amount of professional achievement could prepare anyone to carry. As the investigation stretched from weeks into months, a troubling fracture appeared in the public narrative surrounding the case. Legal expert Chad D. Cummings described the disappearance as a case of competing realities, with Savannah Guthrie and Sheriff Chris Nanos offering clashing accounts of motive and public risk. HNGN. Sheriff Nanos told NBC that the crime was targeted but warned the public that the suspect could strike again and that no one should feel safe. Meanwhile, Savannah's public statements framed the abduction as potentially rooted in her own celebrity. HNGN. These two interpretations carry very different implications. If the crime was tied exclusively to Savannah's fame, the threat to the broader Tucson community is minimal. If the perpetrator is someone whose methods and motivations extend beyond one family, the threat is open-ended. The uncertainty itself became part of the community's trauma. Former FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit researcher Dr. Ann Burgess suggested the kidnapping of Nancy Guthrie may not have been targeting Nancy directly, but rather someone close to her who would be hurt the most by her kidnapping. She described the act as a very mean, angry, and horrible thing to do, and no